Hello, I'm here with Susan Sherrick, who is an art dealer and a gallerist in Los Angeles, and also has worked in many places throughout the country, manages artist relationships, manages artist sales, and has a photography background and photography practice of her own. And today we're having a conversation as part of my residency with Gazelle Art House and Gazelle.io. I'm speaking in this series with women whose work I admire, with women whose worlds I admire, and Susan is a friend of mine. And just as with other friends I've spoken to on this series, I'm really excited to hear about the ways that she enables artists and works. And the thesis behind this conversation series for me is that the way that the themes that occur in my life and my practice resonate in a variety of different fields. And I've been really pleased with how I've gotten to know friends better as well throughout this process. So Susan, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So to start with, I know a good amount about your background and your history, but why don't you share sort of the brief version of the story that got you to where you are today, as well as the way you described your job at the gallery.
Sure. I've been working in the art world for, oh my gosh, almost 20 years. I'm currently the director at 1301 PE in Los Angeles. And my first, I guess, art world job was working in the art museums at Harvard. I was the assistant to the chair of the art and architecture department, who at that time was Yve-Alain Bois. So that was kind of an interesting start. And from there, I've worked for Marian Goodman and David Zwirner in New York, as well as the consultant Sandy Heller. And I was at Fraenkel Gallery in San Francisco as the director of sales for almost 4 years. I also owned my own gallery for a short time, and I represented the Eggleston Artistic Trust. And I've now been with 1301 PE for almost 3 years.
And tell us a little bit about 1301 PE.
Well, the gallery just celebrated 28 years. Brian Butler, who is the owner of the gallery, started it in his apartment in Santa Monica. And the name comes from the apartment's address, which was 1301, and then PE is Projects and Additions. But Brian started out doing prints and multiples, and he's worked with, he's done projects with John Baldessari and Diana Thader. We still work with Diana Thader. Some of the artists that I work with right now are Superflex, Pay White, Kirsten Everberg, Uta Barth, Rickrit Taravanija, Jorge Pardo. Yeah, it's a really wonderful mix of artists. It's a nice place to be.
And as I understand, one of the things that I see in talking with you socially is the way in which, in your current role, but in many of the others that you mentioned as well, you're not just in charge of or doing a lot with gallery management and sales, which is extremely important to us artists, but a lot of other galleries will call it like artist liaison or artist management. Can you talk about your artist relationships and the way you like to develop and nurture artists as someone who's got a huge eye on the business side and on what enables artists to keep creating?
Sure. Let's see. I'm trying to think of where to start. Well, each one of my artists is, I wouldn't say any one of them is that they're all at the same point in their career. Some of them are much more further along than others. But my job entails finding exhibitions, putting exhibitions together. In some cases, like looking for other galleries in other cities for my artists. my relationship varies artist to artist. There are some artists, like for example, Pay White. I talk with she and her assistant or studio manager, Kate, a couple times a week. She's probably the one I have the most contact with. But then, you know, I don't know, it's, let me see.
I guess operationally, the way that you support artists might vary depending upon their needs in their career. But what is the maybe some of the philosophies or underlying feelings towards working with artists that help guide you and sort of navigate what those decisions are? So the artist decides how much they need to talk to you, but then you're also coming at it with a set of beliefs and values about art as well.
Well, for example, like we get a lot of requests for like exhibitions or catalogs or, I mean, obviously sales. So it's like, if there's not something in the gallery, I'll be in touch with the studios, and that's across the board. Or like, I do a lot of, like, cause we do get a lot of requests at the gallery towards like, you know, so-and-so is working on an exhibition at, say, like the Hayward or the Serpentine, and they want to include one of the artists. And of course, those are venues that every artist wants to be or have an exhibition in. So it's a lot of like putting the artists in touch with the exhibition or with the museums if there's not a direct contact already. Yeah, am I answering your question?
Yeah, we can keep. They're meant to be pretty open-ended questions, so that there's what I'm looking for. Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey from studying photography and having a photography practice to going into art, and the way that journey, and also how that has informed the way that you work with artists.
Well, it's funny because when I worked for Marian Goodman, I was still very focused on becoming a photographer. Like I was thinking about going back to school for my MFA. And around that same time, Marian had picked up John Baldessari, and he came to get the gallery in New York and was talking with the senior director who I worked for at that time. And she was like, I just bought 5 of Susan's photographs and now she wants to leave me and go to grad school. And and at that time, John was the head of the MFA program at UCLA. And his advice to me was, if you're working here and she's buying your work, there's nothing I can teach you, save your money. And so I actually ended up not going to grad school for my MFA. But I didn't stop making work probably up until like, or seriously stop making work up until like 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer. I just like, my job kind of took over my life, and that's okay. I love my job. So, and I love the artists that I get to work with. So I felt okay giving up being a full-time artist or even part-time artist. So, and I still shoot, but it's nothing like it used to be.
But having had a full-time practice, I presume is also not until like I used to run competitively, and you would often want to have a coach that ran at the level that you were aspiring to, or just at least understood a lot of what it entailed to hold that practice. I see that as being something that possibly allows you to have a certain relationship. Again, I know all of your relationships, all of your artists are different. Can you talk at all about some of the work you do outside of the gallery, or like I know you're doing some curatorial projects or have done some in the past that you might be able to speak more publicly about, and if not, we can just edit this section out.
But to answer your question in terms of like curating or shows I've put together, as I mentioned, I owned my own gallery for a while. We were open for a little over a year. I had a business partner who decided he didn't want to be in the art business anymore. So, which is why I don't have a gallery anymore. But in that time, the gallery was in Nashville, and there really wasn't anything like Sherrick and Paul in Nashville or in the greater South. I mean, there's very few contemporary art galleries who were showing artists at the level of Hiroshi Sugimoto or Barry McGee or Eggleston. And I was very proud I got to do that for a while. The last exhibition we did at the gallery before we closed was with Malick Sidibé. He's represented by Jack Shaman in New York, but he passed away a few months after the gallery closed. And he's a photographer whose work I have admired for quite some time. So the fact that I got to do that exhibition of his work, and the fact that he said yes to it, it was really, really cool. The fact that I got to represent Eggleston, that he's been a hero of mine forever. You know, our opening show included 2 works by Barry McGee. And as far as I know, he had never shown anywhere in the South. Same with photographer Katy Grannan, British painter Nick Goss. Yeah, it was an incredible mix of people. So,
and as someone whose job by its very nature is to care for the artist and to care for the artist market, how is it that you, how do you work with artists so that they see those opportunities, but without, I assume your nature is not to push them towards the, just to sell. How do you walk that line in your work? Or not that line, how do you do that?
Well, for example, when it's somebody emailing the gallery for the first time, somebody I haven't worked with in the past, I don't know who they are, I tend to do a little detective work, or as much as I can, before I get back to the person that's emailed. I am very protective of all my artists, always have been. I care about where their work goes. And I don't want to see it end up, I mean, people talk about how an artist's work should never show up at auction. It's like the worst thing in the world. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely far from the best thing in the world. And I just, I want to see all my artists' work, all my artists who are friends of mine that I may not even represent at the gallery or work with, but I want to see them in great collections, whether it's private or public.
And what are some elements of great collections?
Oh, I don't think it's just one thing. I mean, I've seen, well, I work with one currently. She and her late husband only started collecting like a few years ago, but they dove in head first. I mean, they just kind of went for it, and she's still going for it. But they have a lot of blue chip photography and paintings, and she just bought like her first sculpture that she's super excited about. And so nurturing them and their collection and introducing them to new artists, that's always so fun and exciting. But then like introducing my artists to new collectors who they may not have heard of, but are excited about what they're doing, that's equally as exciting.
And how have you found, especially having, not being from Los Angeles and having owned a gallery in Nashville, how do you find Los Angeles as the evolving art place that it is, and especially in the last couple of years, at least I feel like it's continued to be?
Well, I've been coming to LA since I was a kid. And I've been coming to LA as an adult working in the art world since 2007. 2006. So I've known for some time, and I knew when I took the job with Brian 3 years ago that LA has a great community of collectors and museums and galleries and artists. So that wasn't new to me. I think the biggest adjustment for me with the LA art world and the community, and this continues to be a little source of frustration, people don't come to galleries here. And like, having worked in New York, where Saturdays at the gallery, that's a big thing. That's super social. So it's so much fun. Like, everybody comes out. But in Los Angeles, it's like, it kind of depends on who the show is, like who the artist is. But it's like, there's definitely not regular foot traffic. And I'm not just speaking that from my experience at 1301. This is also from talking to friends who have worked at Regan Project and Blum and Poe and Gagosian and Matthew Marks. I mean, it's like, everybody says it, like, people don't go to galleries here. And I think that's kind of a bummer.
And what do you think the impact on the, like, something we'll talk a lot about is just like, oh, like the art world, and I keep sort of somewhat joking, but not really, saying like, no, the art community. What do you think the impact of that distributed driving, people not showing up to the shows, how do you think that impacts both the world and the community of the art here in Los Angeles?
It has a pretty big impact. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we, on the night of an opening or the day of the opening, and this really blows my mind, like, people will call, who have RSVP'd to come to the artist dinner, will call that afternoon and say, sorry, we can't come, it's raining.
It's really interesting, especially in that we were just speaking before the recording about the show I have coming up, and kind of like, oh, people physically might not be able to go to it. It's almost like Los Angeles has set itself up to just have that be fine.
I know.
But back to the art community, around the time when we met, I had been thinking, and still had been thinking a lot about wanting to find people in the art world, in the art community, that noticeably held a different demeanor, set of values, way of working that I think were counter to the narrative of what the art world is. How has someone with your disposition and also, I guess, your kindness and generosity been able to succeed in a place that doesn't necessarily publicly reward that as a persona?
That's a good question. I don't know, like I've said to you, like, I love what I do. I love the artists that I get to work with. I love the work that I'm surrounded with. It makes me get out of bed every morning, and I just like, and it's, I mean, especially right now, it's far from easy. Like, I can't imagine doing anything else. And I've thought about it. Like, after the gallery closed, I thought, oh, maybe I'm done with my time in the art world. So I moved back to San Francisco and I tried getting a job in tech. And I soon found out that was definitely not for me, as much as I'm fascinated by it. But something about the art world and being around artists and being around the work they're making, it feeds me. And I love that, so it's like, yeah, it's a really tough place. It's a tough job. The art world is not easy or forgiving or nice, but I love what I do. And I meet tons of great people all the time. I've worked for really wonderful people. I've taught me a lot. I feel like I'm very lucky in the sense that I've only worked for dealers who really love and take care of their artists. And I know a lot of artists who can't say that, some of whom are friends of mine. So I'm grateful for that too.
Career, like independent of where they are in their career, what have you seen as being some of the most important things for an artist to be thinking about at all stages?
I have been saying this for the longest time, and I think it's super important because it can be a huge foot in the door. Never say no to group exhibitions. I've watched several artists, one of whom's a really good friend of mine and is having her first, well, she was supposed to have her first museum exhibition in Europe this summer, and it got postponed, obviously, until next year. But I mean, because I think with group exhibitions, you never know, well, you may or may not know, but like the company that you can be in, and that can be huge. And as I was saying, it's just, that can be a huge foot in the door. So I know a lot of young artists are just like, you know, when they get asked about group exhibitions, they'll turn their nose up at it or be snooty about it. And I just think you never know what's going to come out of it. And I think they can be super important.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I look forward to sharing this with a group of people, and I look forward to seeing you whenever it is I can actually see you.
I know, me too. I know. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I know. I'm excited when we can finally hang out again soon. I hope it's soon.